This next video offers a vision of what we would like to see more of in Portuguese public hospitals. It is our wish that all maternity care honours the birthing process, offering respectful care that prioritises mothers, babies and families, putting them at the centre of care.
The midwives were respectful, they took things slow, they asked for consent, and it sounded amazing. It sounded just like what I had read about, and I said to my husband, we're going to go there. So I'm Shona. I'm the mother of two young girls who are 4 and 1.5. I'm the creator of pregnantinportugal.pt and the Facebook group Positive Pregnancy, Birth and Postpartum in Portugal. My husband's Portuguese. We met in London. He'd always wanted to come back to raise his family here. We arrived September of 2019. I found out I was pregnant in February 2020. Kind of thought I'd have the pregnancy to settle in, not knowing we were going to be in lockdown the following month. My husband's from here, grew up here. He had always used the public health system. As I'm from the UK, used to how the NHS works, that made sense to me. We went to the Centro de Saúde, the health centre. They referred me to one of the hospitals in Coimbra. So I had my appointments, had the scans there, I had the obstetrician appointments there. So I was unemployed. Which kind of turned out to be a blessing in that I could do a deep dive into all this pregnancy, birth, postpartum. I became really fascinated. I bought several books. I then tried to find information about giving birth in Portugal specifically. And all the negative stories I was reading about hospitals in Portugal, everything I was finding was just scary. All I learned the term obstetric violence, which I never heard of before. The episiotomy rate was really high. I read stories of people not being asked for consent, particularly for episiotomies, but other interventions as well. And I was getting really freaked out. So I was telling my husband this. At first I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's so interesting. We're mammals and we like to give birth in the dark and all this stuff. When I learned about it here, I even thought, could we go back to the UK? Because this is scaring me. But of course there was COVID. Even if we have to go to some different part of this country, that would be easier than going specifically to give birth in the UK. My husband thought I was just freaking out for kind of, not no reason, but sort of excessively, until he spoke to a friend of his who had given birth. Yes, you can get mistreated here. She's not panicking for no reason. Meanwhile, I had my prenatal appointments in the hospital in Coimbra. When I had asked certain questions with my basic Portuguese, I just hadn't really liked their responses. When I asked whether they'd have a shower or bath or something available, water does nothing, just get an epidural. And I didn't like that kind of being brushed off. I'd obviously heard about water births, which are common in the UK and other countries, and water can't do nothing. Why would people give birth in water if that was the case? When I drew up a birth plan and I went through that with one of the obstetricians there, she said my husband couldn't cut the cord. My father cut our cords. It's not exactly a modern practice. Immediate skin to skin. Depends on the doctor on the day. I didn't really want to take those chances. I'd written, I don't want to be asked if I want an epidural. I just wanted to put that to say, I know it's there. So I hadn't written, I don't want one, but she took it like that. Why don't you want an epidural? I want it to be natural. And she said, it is natural, you just don't feel pain. And I didn't like the way it was presented. That's not technically true. It's not that simple. There are always risks and benefits to everything. Coimbra is one of the best hospitals. Why wouldn't you want to go there? It's not about the woman's experience. If she comes out with birth trauma but her baby's alive, that's great, and so they say it's one of the best hospitals. There's more to it than that. So I was looking at these other options. At some point, I came across a clip where there was a woman who had given birth at Póvoa de Varzim, Porto area public hospital. And it sounded amazing. It sounded just like what I had read about. The midwives were respectful. They took things slow. They asked for consent. And I looked it up, immediately, where is this place? And I thought, oh, it's not that far. And I said to my husband, we're going to go there. Another factor in this was that it was 2020 and there were many women having to give birth by themselves, weren't even allowed to have their partners there. There was always the possibility of testing positive for COVID. If I happen to be on the day without my husband, I really need to be somewhere that I trust the people I'm with. I don't want to be without him and also worrying about obstetric violence and being mistreated or taking my baby away from me or whatever it was. I don't want to be worrying about that as well. I asked our family doctor to make the referral to Póvoa de Varzim. I'd also had a birth plan consultation with them, which really reassured me. Minimal interventions basically was all fine. So I went there for my first full-term consultation at 37 weeks and a few days. I had an appointment with the obstetrician, did a scan. Then I was told, your baby's in the 5th percentile of weight. This might mean that your placenta is failing. She needs to be born sooner rather than later. This really shocked me. I was without my husband for the appointment, as I had been because of COVID. I called him, told him the situation. I had asked, are there any alternatives? Like, what happens if we don't do anything? And basically I was told, if you don't have the induction next week, you might have a stillborn. If you hear the word stillbirth. For me, that just sent me into shock. I thought, okay, whatever, let's do whatever you say. I had read about big babies, and a lot of big babies are not actually big in the end. And so I was prepared for that. I was prepared to say, no, it's okay if it's too big. I was ready for that. But when they said she was too small, that I was like, I don't know what to do. I guess she must. I agreed to it. I was just so scared. And I was really worried that she was going to come out with some kind of disability. Something was going to be wrong. A really emotional week. So the induction was booked for 38 weeks and 4 or 5 days. We arrived in the morning. I think we were scheduled in for like 8 a.m., 9 a.m. But then we were just waiting around for a long time. It was mid-afternoon, around 3 o'clock. They inserted the prostaglandins and nothing happened for a little while. Within a couple of hours, I started to feel contractions, but it was strange. I felt them in my cervix, almost. I could kind of almost feel my cervix dilating. I felt a lot of, I felt pain, I suppose, a lot of pressure around my cervix. I wanted to be moving around a bit, but I had to have the monitor on. They did warn me they had to monitor a bit more because it was an induction. I was in a shared room. There were 3 beds in the room, and then there was another lady who'd had her baby already. The curtains were all drawn, kind of aware someone else was there. It was quite intense. It just felt like one long contraction. I don't remember there being that many breaks where I could sort of just catch my breath. And I felt something kind of pop, and I thought, oh. So my husband called one of the nurses to come, and she checked, and I was 3 to 4 centimeters along. It all became very intense once my waters had broken. I was still in the shared room, but I was finding it really hard to focus on my hypnobirthing recordings. I was trying to breathe, but I was feeling the need to groan as well. I really needed to vocalize. I felt a little bad for other people who were around, but I just, you can't control yourself at that point. So it was a while that we were waiting for a private room. I imagine it was maybe a couple of hours after that. And I remember the walk down the corridor was hard. I really could walk a few steps and another contraction would come, and another few steps and it would happen again. And the midwives were all supporting me. My husband was there too. There was an ensuite bathroom which had a shower. My husband was putting the shower down my back. That was really nice. But then that got interrupted because they had to monitor again. They put the belt on me. I remember being able to move though. It wasn't very constraining to have it, but they had to kind of make sure it was in the right place. So then I was in the room with the bed and whatnot. The midwives, they noticed that I was leaning forward. I was leaning over the bed. That's kind of the position I wanted to be in, was facing forward and leaning forward. They went to get a gym mat and an inflatable birth stool, kneeling on the gym mat and leaning over the inflatable birth stool. And that was how I stayed. From then on, my husband was at my head, grabbing his hands, and I wouldn't let him move. The midwives one of them was massaging my back during the contractions. That was really soothing. I liked that. I remember the room was dark and they were very quiet. The midwives. The thing my husband said afterwards as well was they were really hands off. They weren't right there, waiting for the baby to come. They were kind of just standing back a bit, letting things happen. Obviously there was the one who was massaging me. I was probably maybe 3 or 4 people in the room, but I'd been pushing for a while. I think it had been 20-25 minutes. One of the midwives said she could see the head, and she asked me if I wanted to touch the head. But I literally just couldn't move. I couldn't contemplate even moving my hand anywhere. It's nice that they asked. So it had been a while of pushing. One of the midwives came over right next to me. I wrote down almost, I hope, what she said. These words were so important to me. So she leaned down. She may have even put a hand on my shoulder. She was right there next to me. I had my eyes closed. But she said to me, "Shona, your baby is right there and she's ready to be born. She really wants to come out and meet you, but you have to let her. It's time to let go of all your fears. You're going to be an amazing mother." And I can't think of those words without tearing up and without getting shivers. It was like an angel had come down. It was just a beautiful moment. In the next push, she came out. So thank you, because she just really spoke to my heart. She really read the situation. She didn't say, "Gotta go, come on, keep going, keep pushing." She didn't say, "Oh, I gotta do an episiotomy, she's not coming out." None of that. She just spoke to my heart. And that's what I needed to finally let my girl into the world. It was just beautiful. They passed my baby up to my chest. I remember thinking, "Oh, she's huge." I mean, she wasn't huge. She was just average, but I was expecting this tiny baby, obviously. I'd been told she was tiny. And I thought, how did you fit inside of me? This entire human being fit inside of me, and now she's here. They did all they had to do. Again, just very, very calm, very discreet. No panicking. Everything was fine. She was perfect. She was fine. She was absolutely fine. Quite calm, happy to be there on my chest. It was just beautiful. I found out I was pregnant with my second baby when our first was about to turn 2. All was well. It was another low-risk pregnancy. With my first birth, I decided to go to Póvoa de Varzim, a public hospital, because that had been a positive experience. I was thinking I'd probably go back there. I'd been running my project. I'd spoken to lots of women and couples who'd given birth in Portugal. The kind of birth scene I knew had changed a little bit in that time, and learned a lot through my Facebook group. So I knew that I may have other options this time, and I knew that the hospital in Famalicão was up and coming in terms of women-centred approaches. A friend of mine told me about Vila de Gaia. And so I was looking into these. They'd had renovations done, they'd had some new trainings or even new staff members, I don't know. They'd kind of had a bit of a revamp. We went to a tour there, but it was all a little bit rushed, and I have a lot of questions. What exactly their policies were. So after that tour, I then emailed the secretary from the hospital, actually attached my birth plan. He offered me a phone call with one of the midwives, and we could really go over each point. It really sounded like they were really hot on asking for consent for everything, really made an effort to get their episiotomy rate lowered. The facilities, when we'd seen them, really did look very modern. Private rooms, private postnatal room as well. It really felt like a private hospital. But I was also unsure still about whether I would go back to Póvoa. So I also had a birth plan consultation with them online. One thing that had changed was that they had the birth pool available. The catch being that you are not allowed to actually give birth in water. There are all these kind of pros and cons. I'm such a geek. I even wrote a table of pros and cons of the 2 hospitals. I was really I really don't know which one to choose. They both sound good, but in different ways. Where am I going to ask my doctor to refer me to? And I did choose Vila de Gaia. I think partly because of all the private rooms, partly because of the distance. My first birth was relatively quick. My mum and sister also had relatively quick births. Seems to be kind of a thing in our family. The distance does make a bit of a difference. I was 39 weeks and 4 days when my labour started. My eldest was asleep by that point. I got out my Pilates ball, got my TENS machine out. My sister-in-law arrived. As soon as she arrived, we were gone. So my contractions, they were coming quite fast. I put on my playlist of just fun songs from the 90s, kind of singing along to that in between my contractions in the car. And we arrived. They could see I was in labour. They took me to the labour ward, but my husband had to go to fill out some paperwork. So I was without him for a bit. Took me to a room, they examined me. I was 9 centimeters along already, so really in the thick of it. Oh, they had to put in an IV line. It was just their protocol. That hadn't happened during my first birth at the other hospital. Clearly not a nationwide thing. I knew the reason why they were doing it. Got taken to a delivery room and my husband was there. He knew my birth plan, so he said, oh, can you dim the light? Oh, last time she was leaning over an inflatable birth stool on the floor on a mat. We went and got what we needed. I was in the position that I found comfortable. Thinking back, they were a little bit chatty. You know, I would have preferred them to be a bit quieter. My husband said they did ask to do another cervical check and he refused on my part. Again, he knew my birth plan. Yeah, water still hadn't broken, but I was there in my zone. Still, my 90s playlist was still playing. I didn't really want to move, but I was like, oh, okay, I'll try. So I kind of lunged, I was still there, and I kind of lunged to one side, slowly lunged to the other side, and then I came back to the middle. Remembered to put my knees together a little bit. She said that can help to open the hips up. My waters broke all over the midwife. According to my husband, they were right there. You know, my first birth, they were more hands off. This whole experience was very intense. It all went so quickly. I was screaming quite loudly. I remember the thought, why am I doing this again? And then very soon she was there. She was born just under 3 hours after my first contraction. She was right there. They put her onto my chest. So glad that she was finally there with me. I could finally hold her.